In the grand history of Rome, few emperors have left behind a legacy as bizarre and disturbing as Commodus. Born in 161 AD as the son of the wise and respected Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Commodus was expected to continue his father's legacy of stability and philosophy-driven rule. But instead of a just and disciplined leader, Rome got a man obsessed with power, bloodshed, and his own divine status. From a young age, Commodus was raised as a future ruler, witnessing firsthand how Rome was governed. However, unlike his father, who spent his life trying to secure the empire's borders and promote intellectual growth, Commodus had little interest in politics or administration. He was far more captivated by gladiatorial combat, extravagant displays of power, and his own self-image. What made Commodus truly infamous was his belief that he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He didn't just admire the legendary hero, he dressed like him, wearing a lion's skin and wielding a heavy club. He commissioned statues of himself in this attire all across the empire, forcing his subjects to worship him as a living god. But his god complex didn't stop there. In an unprecedented display of megalomania, Commodus renamed Rome itself, calling it Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. He didn't stop at renaming the city. He also changed the names of the months of the year to reflect his various titles, ensuring that every aspect of Roman life revolved around him. His increasing detachment from reality made him dangerous. Unlike previous emperors who at least maintained a level of respect for the traditions of Rome, Commodus ruled with unpredictability and unchecked vanity. He surrounded himself with corrupt advisors who catered to his every whim, letting them handle the governance of the empire while he indulged in grandiose spectacles. Meanwhile, Rome's elite watched in horror as their emperor transformed from a ruler into a self-obsessed performer, more interested in gladiatorial games than affairs of the state. As Commodus grew more convinced of his divine status, his rule became increasingly unstable. He believed he was not just ruling Rome as a god, he was Rome itself. His reign marked the beginning of the empire's decline, a shift from disciplined governance to chaos, all driven by the delusions of a man who thought himself immortal. Would Commodus' reckless indulgence and self-obsession bring about his downfall? The answer would come in the most brutal way imaginable. For most Roman emperors, the gladiatorial games were a way to entertain the masses, to reinforce their power, and to keep the people distracted from the real problems of the empire. But for Commodus, they were something far more personal. He didn't just enjoy watching the fights, he wanted to be part of them. While previous rulers maintained a certain dignity by observing from the imperial box, Commodus stepped into the arena himself, dressed not as an emperor, but as a warrior, craving the applause of the crowd. At first, the Roman people were shocked. No emperor had ever degraded himself by fighting in the games. Gladiators were usually slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, men who had no choice but to fight for survival. Yet here was Commodus, the most powerful man in the empire, acting like one of them. But unlike real gladiators, Commodus was never in any real danger. His opponents were carefully chosen, weak, malnourished, or already wounded. Some were even forced to fight with dull blades, ensuring they couldn't harm the emperor. When he fought wild animals, they were often tied down or caged, making it nothing more than a performance rather than a true battle. Despite this, Commodus saw himself as a true champion. He didn't fight for survival, he fought for his own glory. He charged the empire enormous sums of money for his performances, treating them like professional events. He considered himself unbeatable, the greatest warrior in Roman history, a living embodiment of Hercules. His obsession only grew, and he began to spend more time in the Colosseum than in the palace, leaving governance in the hands of corrupt advisors while he played out his fantasy. To make things worse, he forced Rome's elite to attend his games. High-ranking senators and nobles, who were once treated with respect, now had to sit in the stands and watch their emperor behave like a common performer. Many hated and feared him, but none dared to speak out. Commodus had made it clear that those who questioned him would not live long. One of the most disturbing aspects of his time in the arena was his treatment of the helpless. He reportedly dressed people with disabilities as mythological creatures, only to slaughter them in front of cheering crowds. Some sources claim he killed over 100 lions in a single day, walking through the arena as if he were on a hunt, basking in the admiration of the people. But this admiration was not as widespread as he believed. Many in Rome saw him as a disgrace, a ruler who had abandoned his duties in favor of violent spectacle. Commodus believed he was the greatest gladiator of all time, but in truth he was something far more dangerous, a ruler who had lost touch with reality. His reign was becoming more unpredictable, his decisions more erratic, and in a city like Rome, where power was everything, it was only a matter of time before his reckless behavior made him enemies he couldn't defeat. Would his obsession with the games lead to his downfall, or was there still time for Commodus to realize that an emperor was not meant to be a performer? The answer, as Rome would soon learn, was written in blood. As Commodus grew more obsessed with his own glory, the empire around him began to crumble. While he played at being a gladiator, Rome's true rulers were not emperors or senators, but corrupt advisors who controlled the empire in his absence. The most notorious of these was Marcus Aurelius Cleander, a former slave who rose to power by ruthlessly eliminating rivals. With Commodus distracted by his arena performances, Cleander sold political offices to the highest bidder, allowing men without experience or loyalty to take control of key positions in Rome. The effects were disastrous. The empire, once stable under Marcus Aurelius, descended into chaos. Governors and military commanders who had bought their way into power cared only about enriching themselves. The people suffered from food shortages and economic instability, while the elite whispered in secret about their growing fear of the emperor. But Commodus didn't care. As long as he was worshipped, as long as the games continued, Rome could burn. His paranoia deepened. The failed assassination attempt by his own sister, Lucilla, in 182 AD only made things worse. After the plot was uncovered, Commodus ordered mass executions, purging senators, military officials, and anyone he suspected of betrayal. He withdrew further from public life, rarely appearing in the Senate, and instead ruled from his palace, issuing decrees that elevated his own status to near-divine levels. His orders became more bizarre. He renamed the legions after himself, gave new names to the months of the year based on his own titles, and even demanded that Rome itself be called Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. As his power became more absolute, so did his cruelty. Those who displeased him met gruesome fates. Some were thrown to the beasts in the arena, others were executed in staged battles to entertain the crowds. It wasn't just political enemies who suffered. Commodus had no patience for anyone who challenged his ego. He would have men put to death simply for not cheering loudly enough at his games. His belief in his own greatness became so extreme that he declared himself not only the reincarnation of Hercules, but also the son of Jupiter, the king of the gods. He demanded that people worship him as a living deity, and those who refused were either exiled or executed. Rome, the greatest empire in the world, had fallen into the hands of a man who believed himself to be a god, but ruled like a tyrant blinded by delusion. The people could only endure so much. The food shortages, the brutality, the humiliation of seeing their emperor act as a gladiator, all of it pushed Rome to the edge. Commodus had become too unpredictable, too dangerous, and those who once feared him began to conspire against him. For the first time in his life, Commodus, who believed himself invincible, was about to face a battle he could not win. His downfall was coming, and it would be as dramatic as the games he so adored. By the end of 192 AD, Commodus had become a danger not only to Rome but to himself. His reign of terror had alienated the Senate, the aristocracy, and even his own guards. The people were suffering from food shortages, corruption, and mismanagement, while the emperor continued to indulge in his gladiatorial fantasies. But what finally sealed his fate wasn't just his erratic rule, it was his growing unpredictability and paranoia, which left even his closest allies fearing for their lives. The breaking point came when Commodus decided to start the new year in the most bizarre way imaginable. He declared that on January 1st, 193 AD, he would descend into the arena not as emperor, but as a gladiator, officially inaugurating himself as the undisputed ruler of Rome, not as a statesman, but as a warrior god. This was too much, even for those who had tolerated his excesses. The idea of an emperor, a position once held by men like Augustus and Trajan, publicly fighting as a common performer, was an insult to everything Rome stood for. His advisors, including his chamberlain Eclectus, his praetorian prefect Letus, and even his longtime mistress Marcia, realized that Commodus had to be stopped. If he went through with his plan, Rome would be forever disgraced, and their own lives would be in danger. They had seen how easily Commodus could turn aga. Inst those closest to him, if he believed them to be threats, he would have them executed without hesitation. On the evening of December 31st, 192 AD, the conspirators made their move. Marcia poisoned Commodus' wine, hoping to end his life quietly. But Commodus, a man of excess in all things, drank so much that he vomited up the poison, unknowingly saving himself from an easy death. When the conspirators realized their plan had failed, they turned to a more direct approach. A powerful gladiator and wrestler named Narcissus was sent to finish the job. As Commodus lay in his chamber, weakened and unaware, Narcissus entered and strangled him to death. The man who had spent his life pretending to be the greatest gladiator of Rome was finally defeated, not in the arena, but in his own palace by his own people. With Commodus dead, the Senate wasted no time in erasing his legacy. They declared him a public enemy and ordered his statues to be destroyed. His name was removed from inscriptions, his decrees were overturned, and the city he had named after himself, Colonia Commodiana, was swiftly restored to its original name, Rome. It was as if the empire itself was trying to wipe away his memory, to pretend that his rule had never happened. But the damage he had inflicted was irreversible. Commodus' reign marked the beginning of Rome's long decline. His erratic leadership, his neglect of governance, and his obsession with spectacle weakened the empire in ways that could not be undone. Though Rome would continue for centuries, the golden age of stability under men like Marcus Aurelius was gone forever. Commodus had imagined himself as a god, a gladiator, and an immortal ruler. In the end, he was just a man, and like all men, he could bleed, he could fall, and he could be forgot.